The first contrast often appears not in language or scenery, but in tempo. Australia moves with a looseness that quietly unsettles North Americans accustomed to urgency being treated as virtue. Streets feel less compressed by expectation. Conversations unfold without the invisible countdown that often frames interaction in the United States or Canada. Time, while still respected, is not constantly optimized. This difference registers subtly as an atmosphere rather than a rule, but it sets the tone for everything that follows. Early impressions tend to center on how lightly daily life is carried. Workplaces appear less performative. Social spaces feel less transactional. Australians commonly separate identity from occupation in a way that contrasts with North American habits, where professional role often becomes shorthand for personal worth. Here, success is acknowledged without being announced. Ambition exists, but it is rarely broadcast. The emotional volume is lower, not from indifference, but from an unspoken agreement that life does not need constant amplification. As days pass, deeper cultural distinctions begin to surface. North American cultures often reward self-definition through achievement, visible progress, and future-oriented thinking. Australia places greater emphasis on equilibrium between work and leisure, seriousness and humour, effort and ease. There is less pressure to frame every experience as a step towards something else. Moments are allowed to stand on their own without justification. This can feel disorienting to those conditioned to measure time primarily by output. Social behaviour reflects this balance. Informality is not a rejection of respect, but its expression. Hierarchies exist, yet they are softened in everyday interaction. Authority is acknowledged without being dramatised. Australians often default to understatement, where North Americans might lean toward clarity through emphasis. This difference can initially read as detachment, but over time reveals itself as emotional self-regulation woven into the culture. Common situations illustrate this contrast clearly. Group conversations rarely revolve around personal milestones or future plans. Instead, they drift toward shared observation, humour, and presence. Leisure is treated not as recovery from life, but as a core component of it. Outdoor spaces are not escapes, but extensions of daily routine. The environment shapes behaviour, encouraging a relationship with time that feels less adversarial. Gradually, exposure to this rhythm begins to recalibrate internal expectations. Many North Americans find that constant self-monitoring softens. The instinct to justify rest weakens. Productivity remains, but it is no longer the sole measure of value. This shift does not erase ambition, but reframes it, introducing the idea that a life can be full without being relentlessly driven. As this recalibration continues, emotional patterns begin to shift in quieter ways. North American cultures often encourage expressive certainty, clear opinions, defined stances, visible confidence. In Australia, ambiguity is more tolerated. Not every thought is sharpened into a declaration. Silence is not immediately filled, and agreement does not always require affirmation. This creates a social environment where pressure to perform personality is reduced, allowing interactions to breathe. Risk is perceived differently as well. In North America, risk is frequently framed as a pathway to growth, advancement, or reinvention. In Australia, it is more often weighed against stability and quality of life. This does not produce caution so much as selectivity. Choices are filtered through questions of balance rather than acceleration. The result is a collective comfort with enough, a concept that can feel unfamiliar to those raised in cultures of constant scaling and expansion. Everyday routines reinforce this mindset. Evenings tend to belong to personal time without apology. Weekends are treated as protected space rather than flexible overflow for unfinished work. Social commitments are rarely optimized for efficiency. They unfold at their own pace, often without rigid scheduling. For North Americans accustomed to calendars functioning as moral documents, this can feel unsettling at first. As though something important is being neglected, communication styles further underline the contrast. Humor plays a central role, often self-deprecating and deliberately flattening status. Compliments are understated. Self-praise is quietly discouraged. Where North American norms may reward clear self-promotion as confidence, Australian norms often interpret the same behaviour as unnecessary intensity. Belonging is achieved not by standing out, but by blending comfortably into the social current. Over time, these patterns begin to influence internal dialogue. the impulse to narrate life as progress slows. Achievements feel less performative, less in need of external validation. Many North Americans notice a reduction in background anxiety tied to comparison and momentum. Without constant cues to hurry or prove, attention shifts toward immediate experience rather than future positioning. This transformation is not dramatic or announced. It unfolds through repetition, shared meals that stretch longer than planned, conversations that wander without purpose, afternoons that are not justified by productivity. The environment gently rewards presence over urgency. In this context, the North American mindset does not disappear, but it loosens, adapting to a rhythm that prioritizes steadiness over speed, with time. This steady rhythm begins to reshape deeper assumptions about fulfillment. North American cultures often link meaning to accumulation of achievements, experiences, or visible milestones. In Australia, meaning more often emerges from continuity. Life is not framed as a series of peaks to conquer, but as a landscape to move through at an even pace. Progress exists, but it is less narrativized. The absence of constant self-evaluation creates space for a quieter form of satisfaction. This difference becomes especially visible in how stress is managed. In North America, pressure is frequently normalized as the cost of ambition. Exhaustion can even function as social currency. In Australia, persistent stress is more likely to be questioned than admired. The cultural response is not to eliminate responsibility, but to limit its emotional dominance. Problems are addressed without allowing them to consume identity. This produces an atmosphere where seriousness is situational, not permanent. Relationships reflect this outlook. Social bonds tend to feel less instrumental and more sustained. Networking is rarely foregrounded. People remain connected without frequent reinforcement or strategic intent. Familiarity grows through shared time rather than deliberate effort. For many North Americans, this challenges the idea that relationships must be actively managed to remain valuable. Connection here is assumed, not constantly maintained. Gradually, an internal shift becomes noticeable. The instinct to measure life against external benchmarks weakens. Free time no longer carries guilt. Stillness no longer feels unproductive. The nervous system adapts to an environment where urgency is optional rather than expected. This does not result in passivity, but in a calmer orientation toward effort. Energy is conserved, directed more selectively. Australia's influence on the North American mindset is subtle but persistent. It does not demand reinvention or rejection of past values. Instead, it introduces friction against habits of acceleration and self-definition through work. Over time, this friction smooths edges, creating a blended outlook, one that retains drive but tempers it with ease. In this way, Australia does not change what North Americans want from life so much as how urgently they believe they must pursue it. The shift is not about doing less, but about carrying life with less tension. And within that lowered emotional volume, many discover a form of clarity that had been obscured by constant motion.